Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the session Creating the Non-Motor Built Environment Together, a part of the Neighbor Power Indy Conference. My name is Mackenzie Isaac, but friends call me Kenzie, so you can call me Kenzie. I'm an AmeriCorps public ally, and I'm placed with Health by Design, where we work at the intersections of built environment and public health. And I have the incredible privilege of hosting this session today, which will be led by Danielle Frey, Logan Lane, and Jamie McPherson. So a few housekeeping items beyond what the presenters might have embedded in their own presentation. Please feel free to engage with one another using the chat. You can also click on participants, which is at the same right-hand panel, and you can directly message anyone. You can directly message me if you need any assistance navigating technology or would like a question said aloud. Speaking of questions, you can also place some of your more pressing questions in Q&A. There will be an entire 15 minutes at the end of this presentation reserved for that. If someone stole your question, then you can just give that nudge, a little click, and the more clicks a question has, the quicker it'll surface to the top, and the top questions will inform the order in which I facilitate Q&A at the end. You will likely stay muted and your video off throughout, but I don't want that to inhibit your engagement with this amazing material. So if you do want something said aloud, again, just message me however you're most. I will yield the floor to our presenters, and thank you again for joining us this early Saturday morning.
Thank you, Kenzie, and again, thank you. My name is Logan Lane, and I am a walk and bike program coordinator with Health by Design. But today I'm wearing a Indianapolis Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Council hat. I am the secretary of the Mayor's Bike Council, or Mayor's Advisory Council. With me, I have Danielle Frey, who is our chair, and Jamie McPherson, who is the Bike and Ped Coordinator at the Department of Public Works for the City of Indianapolis. All right, let's get right to it. Today, we're going to be talking about creating the non-motor environment together as residents of Indianapolis. Just some brief history about the Mayor's Bike Advisory Council. The Mayor's Bike Advisory Council was started 2009-2010 as the city applied to have a bike-friendly communities, application that they applied for. This application, without getting too detailed, is essentially a way for the city to figure out where they're at as far as being a bike-friendly community. Currently, Indianapolis has a bronze certification for being a bike-friendly community, and the city can use these applications as they apply for them to kind of evaluate what needs to be done to further be more friendly. And there is a silver, gold, and even a platinum certification. And having a Mayor's Bike Advisory Council was one of the things that sort of elevates your city as being bike friendly. Up till late 2019, we've had several really awesome partners who have been with us for almost the duration of that time. And starting late in 2019, we really began to think about what our impact was as a advisory council to the mayor. Throughout our history, we've had some ebb and flows with the city. And what I mean by that is, in some years, we would have a really great connection with the mayor's office, with the Department of Public Works, with the Department of Metropolitan Development. And so what we were really after in late 2019 in our planning going into 2020 was, how can we make the most impact in our community for bicyclists? And so we started to talk about how do we create a vision for impact. And so we began to think about that late in 2019 and into 2020. As a result of that sort of conversation, one of the first things we wanted to do is to become an official recognized committee by the city. We felt that, one, having a city email, which is one of the things as being a committee you get, would be really beneficial to give sort of a certification of recommendation to people, and it would give us better access to city leaders as we look to advocate for bicyclists. So that was one of the first things on our list. Secondly, during the pandemic, summer of last year, the City of Indianapolis rolled out Dine Out Indy and Open Streets, and as a mayor's advisory council, we were able to advocate for places that may not see open streets or may not be thought of as an open streets place, and advocate for them to be able to do open streets. And that letter was sent to the mayor last summer. And then lastly, as a result of the killing of George Floyd and the continued fight for equity and racial justice, there were two committees that were created. The first committee that was created was the Crash Analysis and Prevention Education, CAPE for short. This committee within IMBAC really focuses on how to prevent crashes, one, with tactical urbanism, which I'll explain here in a second, and two, what to do as a bicyclist if you are in a crash. And we saw that this is an issue, that a lot of times cyclists or bicyclists don't really know what to do if they have an interaction with a car, and if they stay on the scene, or how to document, or how to make sure things are documented. So that was one of the things that committee does, as well as trying to prevent crashes from happening to begin with things like tactical urbanism. And then lastly, the committee that I'm a part of, and as well as Danielle and Jamie are a part of, the Diversity Committee. This committee really is very much influenced out of our vision to have a bigger impact in our city from that late 2019-2020 discussion. We really want to make sure that we are advocating for cyclists across Marion County, whether you are a cyclist as a commuter to work, whether you're a road cyclist on the weekends, whether you choose to ride a bike to commute, whether you have to ride a bike because maybe you don't have a car, whether you are a person experiencing homelessness and the bike is really crucial to you, or whether you're a bike messenger. These are the people that we want to advocate for, because in the end, we are all bicyclists and enjoy riding in our community. So what does our group look like now? I mentioned a little bit, we have a core group that has been super passionate for advocating for bicyclists in our community in the last 10 to 15 years since we've existed. And that group has been very, very crucial in creating a core. But like I said, we want to advocate for a lot of different cyclists, whether it's a different method of why you ride, like I mentioned before, whether you're black, brown, white, anyone in our community, we want to be able to advocate for. And part of the conversation of having a bigger impact in our community was, how do we make sure that our group is inclusive? One, on the committee itself, but two, how are we making sure that we're advocating as a group for various neighborhoods around the county and around the city of Indianapolis? Next, where do we want to go? We want to be able to have the biggest impact. We want to be able to project plan with the city, with our diverse group. We want to be able to advocate for various needs around the county and around the city. That's where we want to go. We want to be able to come together as advocates and make change for bicyclists in Indianapolis. That's where we want to go. How should we get there? We've had some varying success, especially with creating diversity in our group from our core, which is predominantly and has been predominantly white. We've started to think about, well, who are the relationships we have currently? And we started inviting people, which is all great, but we found that, like, knowing a little bit about like who else is out in the county isn't good enough. We need to create a communication system and a process to make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible. So we came up with a system to kind of work with various neighborhood organizations like this, and I'll go over that here in a second. So we want to be able to work with community organizations and have a staff member or a volunteer becoming a liaison in the Mayor's Bike Advisory Council. This could be a neighborhood association volunteer that's super into bicycling. This could be a community organization. This could be a community center staff member. This could be a staff member of a CDC in a specific area. We want to make sure that we are involving community members and neighborhood associations and other heavily involved organizations in our group, making sure that we are covering the entire county's population when it comes to bicycling. So what would that liaison do with us? Well, they would come to IMBAC meetings as an advisor to their specific meeting. They would come to us and say, hey, I think there's a really awesome opportunity to have bike infrastructure on X road. And I think we can maybe do a temporary project like a bike lane there. This is called tactical urbanism. And so we would work with them and their community to plan and make that happen with the city. And Jamie will cover that a little bit in a second. Then we would also be able to work with these advisors to advocate for better and permanent bike infrastructure in the future. This is a really cool opportunity. If we've got community liaisons on the IMBAC community across the city and county, we'll be able to advocate with bigger numbers, and with bigger numbers comes better solutions, which is super awesome and a great opportunity to take. Then hopefully, when we're able to have tactical urbanism projects that show this could be a possibility for the future, or we're able to have a large group advocate for specific areas across the county, we're hoping and know that permanent solutions are a possibility. So creating a way to network with neighborhood associations and community organizations across the county, instead of just sort of having not a closed off group like we might have been in the past, but a group that is very transparent and wanting community members to be involved, will create a better IMBAC that has a better impact on our city as a whole. So I'm going to throw it to Jamie here, and he's going to talk about what it might be like to plan a project with a liaison as part of the IMBAC committee.
Awesome, Logan, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm Jamie McPherson. When we think about planning normally from a city perspective and an infrastructure perspective, we are thinking on very long timelines. You don't want like a temporary bridge somewhere. If you're going to invest the taxpayers' dollars responsibly, you want to make sure that something is durable and is serving a purpose really, really well. So because of that, our process reflects a tendency to be very careful and very, very durable. So I'm gonna put as I talk about resources, I'm gonna go ahead and put them in the chat for you guys. So this first one is the DPW standards manual, and it looks really scary and hairy, and there's a small section that I want you guys to focus on, and hopefully if you're really interested in this work, you'll become more familiar with it. But for the most part, planning to most people probably looks like our next slide. So there's a lot of kind of jargon and red tape and lists of things and technical drawings that have a lot of information that is important, but maybe not important for everybody. So, you know, looking at all of this, it's not necessarily clear what it would turn into. But if we go to the next slide, we have kind of a pretty calming, nice street. So the elements that come to most people's mind when they visit this is something, you know, this is probably a pretty pleasant place to walk and be around. And I want you to kind of look at these photos for a second and notice the things that really make that difference, right? So, you know, seeing people around makes a huge difference in that bottom photo. You know, some of the green that we see, the variety, you know, it looks pretty lush. These are also the things that tend to slow us down as humans, no matter how we're traveling around, whether it's walking, biking, or even driving. If you see, you know, these types of things around, it tends to slow you down, which also helps to make us all safer. So when we build this, typically from the city's point of view, we're really focused on those durable materials that happen to be very, very expensive. But there are other materials and methods that are available. So if you take a look at the next slide, you might be surprised to see you could build this with, you know, maybe some tires and some planters and a box of cornstarch. So none of those things are particularly permanent, but if you're careful and intentional about it, they can have the same effect on a short-term basis. So we want to make sure, like I said originally with planning, you want to make sure that you're being responsible with people's resources and you're doing something that is safe and effective. So for the city, that's long-term and expensive, but we believe that with tactical urbanism and some dedicated people in your community, that you can use some of these far less expensive and impermanent materials to have the same effect and test out solutions that might be irresponsible to use the city's resources to test out in normal cases. So go ahead and next slide. So, you know, that being said, in that standards manual in chapter 800, there is a process to do neighborhood traffic calming. So it does tend towards the permanent changes. And so there's some really lofty bars that you need to clear in order to do that. So planning is as easy as 1, 2, next slide. Okay, so it is possible to do it through this process. Here are 13 easy steps to get towards some permanent traffic calming infrastructure. So what we've learned with the division committee is like looking around, can we keep things just as safe and just as effective, but remove some of these burdens? So if you take a look at our next slide, really all we need are these 5. So that's citizen support, traffic advisory committee, street classification on the area that you want to do some sort of project, You need to understand what the alternative traffic calming measures are, and help us out with something called an evaluation report. So 5 things. Take a look at our next slide. So maybe 6. There's one more that could be really helpful, but basically these things fall into 2 categories. So we have engaging with your neighbors and research and resource. And I want to take a second for you guys to look at these 2 categories and maybe even pop in the chat, what does engaging with neighbors mean? What might be important about engaging with neighbors, or what might happen if we don't engage with neighbors? So think about your neighborhood, and just right now, maybe even pop into the chat what you think engaging with neighbors would look like. And then the research and resources, think right now of where you might go for resources to make a project like this happen, or what kind of research you need done. So hours are going to be made out of those 6 categories that I'm sure you guys have already memorized. But I want you guys to just think for a second of like stuff you could do. Ooh, Trent, yes. Okay, so next slide. So what references that that planning process for us at the city? Engaging with neighbors basically has 3 things that come in order, which is seeing if you have 75% of the people that are on the street connected to it. You want to work with local organizations, so if there's a neighborhood organization, and political will tends to rally behind projects that have local business support. So that can be really, really helpful to move a project forward. So that's kind of what we look at for citizen support. The Traffic Advisory Committee, which sounds really fancy, that just means somebody from the community that is willing to learn about some traffic science and help us understand the actual context of the area. So the community liaison that Logan put forward would be an excellent person for that, or anybody that's interested in being part of that and showing up to some meetings. Your mayor's neighborhood advocate could be part of that, or just any champion in the area. If you have a traffic engineer that lives through there, they're probably going to be excited to be part of this. And that the rest of that committee is going to be people from the city to help out. And then the last part is an evaluation report. That's a required neighborhood meeting that is posted. This should not be your first meeting though. The best way to do some of these meetings is how neighbors get to know each other in general. Go for a walk, meet outside. Right now, meet socially distanced, maybe on somebody's porch. You want to be talking with the group as much as possible to make sure that you catch stuff early. And also you might find out some other things that you might be able to work on that's low-hanging fruit. And that kind of information is super valuable for the mayor's neighborhood advocates and the counselors and that kind of thing. So that's what we mean by engagement. Collect support, then do some planning, and then that evaluation. And for the research and resources portion, the first one is just the street classification, which is a fancy word for, make sure it's not a highway. You can go onto the MPO's website to see all of the street classifications. And basically it needs to be probably wider than 40 feet to be able to take up space within the right of way, the space between the curbs. So those, that's a pretty easy barrier and sounds pretty, it sounds more difficult than it is. We also want you to be familiar with some of the alternative calming measures. So that again can be found in that chapter 800, and I've just put them in the chat as well. There's also some really great guides to tactical urbanism, which you'll see some pictures in Danielle's part of the presentation, and I've got a good website as a resource. And the other thing that I want to talk about briefly is we are likely going to do the Dine Out Indy program again this spring, which allows businesses to expand into the public right of way for seating to keep social distance. It's something that should continue. It's a really great way to connect with people and to bring vitality to neighborhoods. So I want to show you guys the website where that will be, and then one of the major constraints is the paid parking. The city, because we sold the ability to do parking, we have to basically pay for it when we take it up. So some of the areas that we did were actually kind of expensive, but there are lots of places around Indianapolis that could do this and benefit from it and don't have that constraint. And we would love to help any of these areas prepare applications, and I think that would be a really great win for those areas. So yeah, and then the last part is where you get supplies and funding. So if it was concrete and really hard infrastructure, these would not be there's really no citizens that would be able to pay for this. But with tactical urbanism, you can do some of these non-permanent projects. And over time, we've been embedding supplies within the community. So these two groups, Freewheelin' and Big Car, both have supplies already purchased and are willing to help with the project, and you can borrow them. So these are great places to reach out for those kind of things. All right, so next slide. Pop quiz. Who remembers all of those? Or any of them? Probably nobody. So I know that's a lot of information really, really quick. So I want to just break it down visually to make it really, really simple. So if you go to our next slide, you need to build neighborhood support, be willing to learn some, yes, Charles Tony, excellent. Neighborhood engagement, that's probably the most important one. So neighbor support is the base. You need to be willing to learn some new skills, the art of traffic engineering to a little bit, and then make sure that it's talked about. We don't want this to be a surprise. So this should be the buzz of the town. So that's engaging with neighbors. The other part, the research and resources. Do you have a canvas that's the right size that's going to work? Is it the right fit? Maybe you can copy something that's already happened from our design standards manual or tactical urbanism guides. And then, okay, where am I going to get my palette of supplies? Some of this stuff are things that you can buy yourself. Some stuff that's expensive has already been purchased by other groups and they're willing to lend. And then there's all kinds of grant opportunities. If you have a project in mind, please reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to help move through any grant applications, especially if you're willing to lend some of the permanent supplies after you're done. So that's kind of a nice quick visual breakdown of the process. So next slide. So, you know, a lot of these things look pretty crazy from, you know, when you have to look at all the different information that's coming at you. You know, but if we look here at 32nd in Pennsylvania, here's a permanent solution that, you know, meets the design requirements. When you see them side by side from above, they don't look quite so crazy. You know, this was an expensive project, but you can imagine some ways to, and we actually did some tactical urbanism in this area. And, you know, if you format it so that it tends to look like things that are already in our design standards manual, it'll be much quicker to make those permanent investments and justify it, because we know the people in the area are behind it and we've already done some of the studying to make sure it'll work. So, all right, with that, I'll hand it over to Danielle.
Good morning. Thanks, Jamie and Logan. So with implementation, this is where we get to make those dreams, those items of what you want to change in your neighborhood come true. So what does a resident-led temporary change look like? Well, I'm going to go show you a few examples here. The first few are some local examples. This first one, next slide, is a project on Shelby Street that Big Car did a couple years ago, where they decided that speeding was an issue on Shelby Street. And so it made it unsafe to cross at some of the crosswalks. And so here they placed some plastic bollards to make the crosswalk more noticeable, as well as kind of let the cars feel like the lane is a little more narrow. Next slide. They also painted extended bump out areas around Shelby Street and placed the bollards as well. Again, causing cars to go a little slower in the area. Next slide. They painted street parking areas to kind of block off safety equipment. And as Jordan mentioned earlier in the chat, that first parking spot along an intersection, they did that along those areas as well, which not only makes it safer for pedestrians and bicycle riders in the area, but also for the cars turning onto Shelby Street. It gave them a little more room to see that oncoming traffic. And then next slide. And then last year at Freewheel and Community Bikes, they used bike parts from their shop to give a little artistic flair to protected bike lanes that they put up along 34th Street in Pennsylvania near their shop. Brent, an artist and neighbor who helped with the project, said that before the project was implemented, neighbors were concerned about speeding, and that with the bike lane they installed on Pennsylvania had parking protecting the bike lane. And so neighbors were concerned that their parked cars' side mirrors were going to get clipped as the cars sped by. And after the bike lanes went up, the neighbors were very surprised and pleased to notice that the speeds really did reduce with that bike lane added there as it narrowed the traffic lanes. Next slide. So as we go through these next couple examples, think of your neighborhood and what issues you have. Do you have bike and pedestrian safety concerns? As you think of these things, type them into the chat, and we'll go through a couple other examples here. Next slide. So a painted traffic circle was used in this neighborhood. I'm not sure exactly where this was, but it is not local at all. To control car flow and slowing the cars in this neighborhood intersection there. That was a pretty wide, easy to speed through intersection before. Next slide. Another little tactical urbanism idea and a fun way to use a cul-de-sac, a dead end, or maybe even an empty parking lot in your neighborhood is creating space for neighbors to teach children traffic safety in a fun and interactive real-world-like experience with a traffic garden. A traffic garden uses like kid-sized mini little streets to learn how to move through things in a safe and law-abiding way. Next slide. So what would you like to see in your neighborhood? If you could do anything, what would that dream be for your neighborhood streets? And we'll discuss that in just a minute here when we start taking questions and answers. Next slide. So before we get into our discussion, I just wanted to remind you of some of these benefits of starting a project like this from the neighborhood up as opposed to from the city down. So through this, you're building that community. Your neighborhood is coming together and bonding over creating this space for your neighbors. And it shows the city what can work or what might not work. Sometimes our efforts are not completely, functional. Like the big car protected bike lane, they had issues with cars parking in the bike lane. And that was one thing that a neighbor, Brent, that I spoke with mentioned that they might change if they were to do that again, at least as a temporary project without lane restriping. And it also creates support from neighbors who might not have said yes without that proof, without seeing it and fully realizing what that could mean for your neighborhood. This temporary project of showing what can be a possibility really helps turn some of those naysayers into, okay, just like Brent said with the bike lane, slowing the traffic, that they were all very pleasantly surprised that the traffic did slow, and even though they didn't understand that would actually happen. And not to mention, it gives your neighborhood a spotlight and can attract elected officials there for a photo op and connect with your neighbors, as well as visualizing the positive instead of just hearing the negative comments, because we know those negative comments are often the loudest ones that come up. So next slide. With that, we want to help you see your neighborhood dreams come to life. So we're going to kind of discuss some of those ideas that you had, and if you would like to move forward with a project, or you think you have a project in mind, we would love to speak with you about these ideas. We would love to come to a neighborhood meeting and talk about this idea of the neighborhood coming together and creating this project. Send us an email. The Indianapolis Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Council, IMBAC@indy.gov. And with that, let's start our discussion. Logan, Jamie?
One of the questions here is, how does IMBAC plan to establish, repair, build community trust in neighborhoods that have a distrust of the city/government or don't understand the city process? Yeah, so this whole process, this sort of creating of the kind of communication system, one, the planning system, two, with Jamie, and then sort of the possibilities with Danielle, whether that be, in a specific urban context or an ex-urban context or even a suburban context, is very new to us. This is something we've been planning from the beginning of the year on, and one of the things we would like to know is what would you all want in that? But two, this presentation this conference is sort of a kickoff of us being able to engage with community organizations like neighborhood associations, community development corporations, and other social assets in neighborhoods across the city. And so I would hope we would be able to have more than just this conversation about how we engage, how they would like to be, approached by the city, or how they would like to communicate with the city as we work together to fix various bike issues around the city itself.
To add to that also, we're hoping this process kind of flips the script. So a lot of times in the past, when a change was happening to the built environment, it came from the city down and maybe had some public meetings because those are required. But by the time that public meeting came about, neighbors didn't have enough time to fully understand. They didn't have the time to learn about what this is, or they weren't reached by the announcement of the public input.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they get there, you know, the city's talking in terms that are not understandable. There's only a short period of time for questions. And a lot of times that project is already in the works. So we want to flip that. We want the idea to come from the neighborhood, and the neighborhood tell the city, this is what I want, and we're going to do it, and we're going to show you that it can work. So that's our ultimate hope with this project, and why we want to help neighborhoods go through that is so that the change isn't put on them by the city. It's created through the community. The community wants to see their streets safer so their kids can play, so the kids can go out and ride their bike, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really important to not come with a solution that we're necessarily trying to advocate for, like a particular. Yeah, I love bike lanes; they're great. But you know, if I go somewhere and I'm like, you can do bike lanes, and they're like, we just want street lights, like, but I have a bike lane, you know, then we're not really building trust. And so, like, I think about an image from Tarkington Park's construction that comes to mind, where there's a group of football players that go to the park every Saturday for 3 years, and you know, one day they show up and there's a fence around it and they don't know why. And it's because, you know, sure, we did public meetings and we did our normal type of outreach, but the end result is that a community group that was using that space had no idea what was happening. And if that group of planners had, you know, gone to the places that people go in that neighborhood, like the barber shop that's right next door, they would have seen the advertisement that a group meets there every Saturday, and you know, been able to engage with them and make some plans. So I think the first step is, you know, we do need to make sure that the planning process can move forward quickly when we get there, but that engagement for us is going to be going to the places that people gather and asking questions and not telling. So that's probably churches in some areas. If they have businesses, great. And then if there's like neither places where people gather or businesses, then some of it will probably need to be door to door. So that's kind of how and then obviously, like, you know, welcoming people to whatever tables we can as soon as they're willing and happy to do so.
That's great. And I don't know if this is a question or more of a statement, but someone says a champion is key, but even establishing a relationship with the champion takes time and work to get into the process and outline. Absolutely. I think one of the things about sort of this process or the sort of communication system process that we've laid out is that we understand that this isn't, you know, naming someone and then boom, the system is fixed, and we've been able to solve a lot of problems. Realize that, you know, at the core of this relationship building with not only the liaison that is interested in this work, but also their community is really important. And I think that that's something that hasn't happened necessarily at the IMBAC level and on our committee. And we were really excited about being able to get out, and one, people know who we are, first off, but two, that we're able to actually, there's some worth in being involved with us as a group and us as we advocate for various areas in the city, that they will see results through relationships that have been built over time. And we realize that is going to take a long time, and in the long haul, it's worth it, right?
So some of the chat items when we were asking people to kind of think of their own neighborhoods or things they would like to see. One thing that Trent mentioned was parked cars on sidewalks. And we, that's something we can kind of think of. Is there a way that we can prevent that with a tactical urbanism project? Is that something that your neighborhood would want to see? How could we make that happen? I think it's possible in areas, maybe not the complete sidewalk. And then the connections to the Penzi Trail and Washington Street, I think that also came from Trent. And Charles mentioned connections to the Monon and adjacent and near adjacent neighborhoods. Those all sound like great ideas. Are those your neighborhoods? Do you have neighbors that are also wanting this? Have you started a discussion with them? And if so, reach out to us. We'll come talk to your neighborhood about these possibilities.
Yeah, and I think like the connection from the Penzi to businesses along there, that lends itself, directly to reach out to those businesses, or maybe plan to include them into this process that we've described, and being like, look, like this is, this probably won't be completely free, but it's going to be like a pretty cheap way to connect to another group that's interested in finding their way to you, and some of that is about framing it and talking to the business of like, okay, of all the advertising that you could do, it's going to cost this much to promote your business on Google for 2 months, or you could spend $200 on supplies and plants and that kind of stuff. And there's a group of people that would be excited to put it out. So those types of things, I think that's a really great direction to go, especially if we're planning to, maybe that's the first step for that business to also do like to give up a parking space for a parklet to do a dine out indie thing this spring. So yeah, I love those ideas, and that's a perfect way to do it. So think of the destination, and if that place is maybe willing or available to give a couple resources to build a tactical urbanism project to their front door, that's going to be easy for everybody, including elected officials, to get behind.
Also, involving a neighborhood business creates a little more of a buzz around things. So it gives it almost an event type feeling. So it's a marketable thing for the business, as well as an extra little excitement for the neighborhood to get behind and come out and enjoy, as well as press about it. So then your neighborhood gets out there in the news about doing this, and then more neighborhoods can do this, as well as it's then more likely to become a permanent fixture when more people know about it and are excited about it.
Jamie, there's a question here, and I think both the chat and in the Q&A, but it says, are there grants DPW could provide for neighborhood-based projects like this? I know you've had some ideas, but I don't know if you're willing to share.
Well, yeah, right off the bat, the Indiana Department of Health, that one just closed for the year, but they're going to continue to do it year after year, on the order of like $1,000 to $5,000 to do a tactical urbanism project. And then we do get grants that pop up, and there's not currently a landing site for those to let people know that they, that they can apply for it or what they need. And so I think there's a couple resources that we are planning to put into play, like a guidebook of how to navigate some of the city processes, you know, a guidebook for, you know, projects, how we think they can move forward kind of based on what we've shown you. And I think another one can be, you know, funding sources that are open and along those lines. I would expect like NACDO and other groups to do that again this spring and summer. And it's pretty quick turnaround. They're like, the applications are open for 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks. So I think it's really important for people to start having ideas ready. And then, you know, I can make a landing site for grants and applications and help people navigate the process. But DPW doesn't have any grants currently for that kind of stuff. I think we probably will have funding available through Walk Bike Places for those kinds of things as well. And ideally that'll turn into some sort of permanent rounds of funding, but that's yet to be seen.
Another annual grant opportunity is through AARP, their Livable Cities grants. Again, I think the application just closed or is about to close for the year. Yeah. But it's another future opportunity there.
Yeah, and just to reiterate sort of what Jamie said is that, you know, again, we're looking to have a lot of impact as the Bike Advisory Council. So we've never had a landing page for grant opportunities. We've never had a website, I think, let alone, you know, something that is a useful tool. But I think like these are the things that we're looking to get feedback on as we engage with community members, is something like having a landing page for grant opportunities that community members could work with IMBAC and the city to implement projects like this. Is that helpful? And that's what we plan to continue to do as we kind of reach out to folks around the county.
We're just about out of time here. And so I just want to say thank you for attending. And again, if your neighborhood is interested in doing something like this, or you want to have more of a neighborhood discussion around this, we would love to help and be involved and help you through the entire process. Send us an email, imbac@indy.gov.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you. All right, I am about to end the presentation, and to transition into your next section, you can click on the American Red Cross icon, which should be on the left-hand side of the where you likely started out. Thank you all again, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.